Welcome to the deep dive. You know how sometimes you see a kid just lose it in the store because they can't have something?
Oh, absolutely. The classic meltdown.
Right. And then you kind of squint and you see maybe a whole country having a similar sort of diplomatic tantrum on the world stage. Is it just me?
No, it's not just you. It's a fascinating parallel and maybe a bit uncomfortable.
Exactly. So today we're grabbing our shovels, metaphorically speaking, and digging into this whole idea of entitlement. Where does it come from?
And how does it scale up from, playground politics right up to international relations?
We've got some really interesting source material here, different perspectives and observations. And honestly, you might find some bits hit surprisingly close to home.
Yeah, I think so. It's one of those things that's so woven into the fabric of, well, everything, that we often don't even notice it, this feeling of, I'm owed this,
Without necessarily putting in the work.
Precisely. And the consequences can range from the personal to the, frankly, kind of absurd on a larger scale.
Okay, so let's start small then. Where does this I want it, therefore I should have it vibe really take root? Our sources point, maybe unsurprisingly, towards childhood.
Right? Those early years, it comes back to that delicate dance of saying no.
Oh, tell me about it. I still have flashbacks to the great breakfast ice cream debate of 22 in my house. The negotiation tactics were something else.
Been there. But the point our sources make is that always giving in, even though it feels like the loving thing, might actually short-circuit the development of resilience.
You're not letting them learn how to handle disappointment.
Exactly. It's that fine line, isn't it, between loving support and maybe smoothing the path too much, creating emotional indulgence rather than strength.
Yeah, and one idea that popped up was this confusion between freedom and just. Constant approval. Like we were afraid to let kids experience any friction.
Shielding them from the natural bumps. And there was that quote, wasn't there?
Oh yeah, that one landed. A child who's never heard no becomes an adult who can't hear reality.
Oh, it's blunt, but there's a core of truth there, isn't there? It really makes you think about how those tough moments shape us.
Definitely. And think about it. If you've never really had to deal with no, how do you handle adult life?
Yeah.
Where no is basically a daily vitamin.
Right. How do you navigate disagreements, setbacks, or just someone having a different perspective if your baseline is everyone should agree with me and give me what I want? Those early lessons are foundational.
Okay, so that's the individual level, the training ground.
Yeah.
But how does that scale up? How does it become a cultural thing?
Well, our sources offered some pretty familiar examples. Think about things like participation trophies.
Ah, yes, the everyone's a winner phenomenon.
Right. Which, sounds nice, but does it maybe dilute the value of actual achievement? Then there's the whole instant gratification thing. We want everything now.
Thanks, Internet and Amazon Prime.
Exactly. And even in school, sometimes you see this intense overprotection trying to create these perfectly safe, challenge-free bubbles.
Yeah, bubble wrapping experiences. And what about social media and all this? Surely that plays a role.
Oh, massively. It can be like an echo chamber for the self, right? A place where your importance is measured in likes and followers, constant validation.
And curated outrage when things don't go your way. It's performative disappointment sometimes.
That's a good way to put it. It's a highlight reel culture,
Wow.
and it can really warp expectations about real life, which is, messy and not always validating.
And it doesn't stop there.
Yeah.
The sources even suggest this feeling can bleed into how we view bigger systems like the legal system.
Yeah, perceptions of unfairness, or maybe a sense that accountability isn't always applied equally, or that it's somehow negotiable.
We saw some specific examples flagged in the materials, there were reports linking a rise in teen violence in New York to potential justice system loopholes. That was one thread.
And then there was that slightly bizarre story about vandalism at Minecraft movie screenings.
Oh, I remember reading about that. Kids causing damage,
Yeah.
and apparently some parents were defending the behavior.
Wild. It is wild. And what's telling there, according to the analysis we looked at, is that parental reaction, that hesitation to enforce consequences, maybe because they don't want their kid to be upset.
Which inadvertently teaches the kid that, hey, maybe rules don't apply to me.
Precisely. Actions without real repercussions.
And then you get these other phenomena, like those mass looting incidents we've seen, sometimes framed as, justified rebellion.
Right. It's this complex area where the lines blur between protest, frustration, and just taking things because you feel entitled to them or that the rules don't matter.
Yeah, the head scratcher. One of our sources had this slightly sarcastic line, something like, we raise kids in echo chambers of ego, then wonder why they break down when life doesn't bend.
Nails it, doesn't it?
All right.
Are we creating a culture where disappointment feels like a personal attack and injustice instead of just part of the deal?
Yeah. So for you listening, maybe pause and think, where do you see this stuff playing out? In your town, online, in the news?
It's definitely food for thought.
Okay, let's zoom out even further. Way out. How does this whole entitlement thing maybe manifest on like a national level?
Ah, the big picture. Well, our sources brought up this concept of the U.S. sometimes adopting a sort of global policeman mindset.
Okay, let's tread carefully here. We're just exploring the ideas from the sources, not getting into heavy political debate.
Exactly. It's about the perception described in the materials that the U.S. often takes a leading, sometimes interventionist role in global affairs. And that can be seen by others as stemming from a belief in a unique right or duty to shape things according to American values.
Right, and it's not just about troops or treaties, is it? It's also about cultural exports.
For sure. American movies, music, tech, general ways of thinking, they spread globally. And sometimes the underlying message, intended or not, can come across as our way is the default, the best way.
Which can lead to friction and accusations of double standards sometimes.
That came up too. The idea, for instance, of promoting peace talks in one region while being involved in conflict elsewhere, or how international agreements are sometimes viewed, maybe adhered to when convenient, but less so when they conflict with perceived national interests. A sense of exceptionalism, perhaps.
There was another quote that jumped out at me from the readings. When a country believes it's always the hero, it never asks if it's the villain in someone else's story.
That's a powerful reframe, isn't it? It forces a shift in perspective.
It really does. Because if a nation, like an individual, assumes it's always in the right, it's going to struggle to genuinely hear, let alone accept, criticism or different viewpoints from others.
Absolutely. And it loops right back to the beginning, weirdly enough. The way a kid handles being told no about a toy. It's a microcosm, maybe, of how a nation handles diplomatic pushback or resistance.
So, okay, we've painted a picture from the personal to the global. It feels a bit daunting. What do we do about it? How do we push back against this tide of entitlement?
Well, the good news is our sources didn't just diagnose the problem. They offered potential pathways forward, starting at the individual level.
Practical stuff.
Yeah, surprisingly practical. One big one is consciously cultivating gratitude. Like literally making a daily practice of noting things you're thankful for that you didn't necessarily earn. Your health, maybe, or a sunny day, or someone's kindness.
It kind of deflates that I deserve the world feeling.
Exactly. Another is deliberately practicing delayed gratification, setting goals that take time and effort, getting comfortable with that feeling of working towards something instead of needing the reward instantly.
Resisting the urge to click buy now.
On a small scale, yes. Yeah. On a larger scale, sticking with difficult projects or relationships, and also engaging in service, helping others, volunteering, just contributing without expecting anything back. It's very grounding.
Yeah, I like that. Gratitude for the unearned. And also being willing to question ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Asking, hang on, why do I feel entitled to this specific thing? Is that actually reasonable? Could I be wrong here?
That self-reflection is huge. It takes guts to challenge your own assumptions like that.
Definitely. Okay, so that's personal work. What about raising kids or influencing our communities?
A lot of it circles back. Saying no lovingly but firmly. Allowing kids to experience and navigate those small disappointments, it builds resilience, not fragility.
And praising the effort, not just the outcome or the person.
Yes. Focusing on, you worked really hard on that rather than just, you're so smart. It encourages a growth mindset. The idea that abilities develop through dedication.
Makes sense. And exposing them to different realities.
Crucial. Volunteering together, travel if possible, reading books about people with very different lives. Anything that builds empathy and perspective beyond their own bubble.
And maybe modeling it ourselves, like admitting when we screw up.
Absolutely. Apologizing sincerely, talking about what we learned from a mistake, that's powerful modeling. It shows that nobody's perfect and accountability matters.
Okay, what about the bigger picture? Societal, maybe even political actions?
The sources suggest speaking up when you see entitlement, but wisely. Not just shaming, but maybe offering a different perspective, challenging the assumption constructively.
Less yelling, more explaining.
Kind of, yeah. Also, supporting education that goes beyond academics, focusing on character, empathy, ethics, community involvement, things that build better citizens, not just better test takers.
And stories. Sharing honest stories about struggles and vulnerability.
Yes. Normalizing the fact that life isn't always easy or fair, and that's okay. It counters that curated perfection we see so much.
And finally, holding leaders accountable, expecting transparency, demanding consequences for unethical behavior.
That sets the tone from the top, doesn't it? It reinforces that the rules apply to everyone.
So the bottom line seems to be grounding ourselves and others in reality checks. Gratitude, responsibility, community.
Exactly. It starts small with each of us, but the ripple effect can be significant when we do it collectively. So maybe for everyone listening, just pick one thing from that list. What feels doable for you right now?
Yeah, one small step. So wrapping this up, the big takeaway seems clear. Entitlement isn't just some minor character flaw. It's this subtle current that can really damage our connections, our communities, and even how countries behave.
Well said. And maybe a final thought to leave people with, drawing from our studies. Let's strive to cultivate a world where individuals, communities, and even nations can hear no and still move forward with resilience and respect.
There's real strength in that, isn't there? Not fragility, but the maturity to handle disappointment, to understand the world doesn't revolve around us.
True resilience.
So maybe just take a second today, think about one little corner of your life where maybe, just maybe, a bit of entitlement has crept in. What would shifting that perspective look like? Anyway, thanks for diving deep with us on this one.
Yeah, thanks for listening.